This video is brought to you by Henson Shaving. On Sunday, Poland went to the polls for the hotly contested presidential runoff that pitted the pro-EU Warsaw mayor, part of Prime Minister Donald Tusk's civic platform coalition, Rafał Trzaskowski, against the law and justice candidate, nationalist historian Karol Nawrocki. Going into the election, the big question was whether Tusk, Trzaskowski's party boss, who was elected about 18 months ago, can get his reform agenda off the ground after nearly 2 years of obstructionism by President Andrzej Duda, a law and justice ally. While most polls suggested a slight lead for Trzaskowski, the final results were incredibly close, and unfortunately for Tusk, Nawrocki eked out a victory with 50.89% of the vote, narrowly defeating Trzaskowski on 49.11%. So in this video, we're going to look at Poland's presidential election results, and why it's bad news for both Tusk and the EU. If you're a TLDR fan and want to support the channel, then consider picking up a copy of our magazine. Too Long helps to fund all of our journalism and allows us to make free videos for YouTube like this one. You can learn more and buy a copy by clicking the link in the description. First, let's start with a bit of context. For decades, Polish politics has been a tug-of-war between two parties: the nationalist right-wing Law and Justice Party, or PIS, and the centrist Civic Platform Party. Between 2005 and 2007, Law and Justice led its first government, but its rule was cut short by a corruption scandal involving their junior coalition partner, paving the way for early elections. These were decisively won by Donald Tusk, who served as Prime Minister between 2007 and 2014, until he resigned to serve as President of the European Council. However, Civic Platform failed to produce a strong candidate to replace Tusk, and was subsequently beaten by Law and Justice in the 2015 election, who continued to govern for 2 consecutive terms. According to many analysts and commentators, during these 2 terms, the rule of law in Poland has severely deteriorated under PIS's rule, and the party's tenure was plagued by corruption allegations. For instance, in 2019, a former Speaker of Poland's lower parliamentary house resigned over accusations he took more than 100 personal flights on a government jet. A former finance minister was accused of having links to a criminal group, and the head of the central bank, a close friend of PIS leader Jarosław Kaczyński, was involved in a pay scandal surrounding 2 senior aides. The PIS also appointed party loyalists to key roles in the media and the courts, leading to widespread concerns about democratic backsliding. As a result, the EU blocked over €100 billion in funding for Poland, and relations between the EU and Poland became tense, to say the least. The early 2020s marked a shift in power, following Tusk's return to the forefront of national politics and his re-election as party leader in 2021. Polling for Tusk, the Civic Platform, and its electoral coalition, called the Civic Coalition, soon improved significantly, in part because Tusk tacked to the right on migration and other social issues. Law and Justice politicians, meanwhile, attacked Tusk for allegedly planning to give up half of the country in case of Russian invasion, after it had published secret defence plans for Tusk's previous government. Despite these attacks, in the October 2023 general elections, promising to reverse the erosion of democratic checks and balances, the opposition bloc, led by Tusk's multi-party Civic Platform, Third Way and the Left, gained a solid majority and unseated Law and Justice from power, after being the ruling party for 8 years. Once in power, returning as the country's new Prime Minister, Tusk's liberal centrist government promised to implement 100 reforms in its 100 days in office, which included dismantling the Law and Justice's controversial judicial and media reforms and overturning extremely strict abortion laws and LGBT rights. His efforts, however, were continuously blocked by the outgoing president, Andrzej Duda, a close ally of the previous Law and Justice government. Duda has used his presidential veto to repeatedly block the new administration's reform, and unfortunately for Tusk, he lacks the 3/5 parliamentary majority required to overturn Duda's vetoes. On top of this, Tusk's coalition itself awkwardly unites the left, right and centre, meaning they found it difficult to agree on enacting their reforms, causing delays. For instance, a key factor motivating the record turnout of young voters in the 2023 election was Tusk's promise to enact the speedy liberalisation of Poland's restrictive abortion laws. However, parties in the coalition agree on liberalisation of abortion to some extent, but disagree on what the extent should be. Another flagship election pledge, which had to be postponed, was radically increasing the annual tax-free income tax allowance to 60,000 zlotys, around 14,000 euros. Consequently, polls began to show Tusk's supporters growing increasingly dissatisfied with the government's inability to advance its reformist agenda. Despite this rising discontent, the Civic platform continued to poll comfortably ahead of Law and Justice over the past year. But it became clear, without an ally in the presidential office, that Tusk will struggle to properly govern during the remainder of his term in office. Clearly, the stakes were high for the 2025 presidential elections. The Civic platform's candidate, Trzaskowski, promised to speed up reforms and was widely expected to win the first round by quite a fair margin. However, whilst the first round on May the 18th did see Trzaskowski come out on top, it was quite narrow and a much tighter race than the polls had anticipated. Trzaskowski gained 31.3% of the vote, ahead of Law and Justice ally Nawrocki, who gained 29.5% of the vote, pledging to oppose Ukraine's NATO membership, introduce a 0% personal income tax rate for families with at least 2 children, and be the, quote, guardian of Polish farmers. Even more worrying for the Civic platform was the notable surge in support for the far right. Far-right candidates Sławomir Mencen of the Confederation Party and Grzegorz Braun finished third and fourth, respectively, securing over 21% of the vote together. Meanwhile, the results for the other candidates from the ruling coalition were disappointing. They set the stage for a highly competitive runoff. Most polls showed the candidates neck and neck, with Nawrocki's support holding steady despite scandals linking him to criminal networks and a second apartment. On election day, an exit poll initially suggested a narrow Trzaskowski victory by 0.6 points, prompting him to declare an early victory. But early on Monday morning, in a sharp turnaround, official results declared Nawrocki the winner, with 50.89% of the vote to Trzaskowski's 49.11%. Nawrocki's win is a significant blow to Tusk, as Nawrocki will likely make it difficult, if not impossible, for his government to pass any big reforms before the 2027 parliamentary election, meaning Tusk essentially has a lame duck administration for the next couple of years. It's also bad news for the EU, as Nawrocki, a pro-Trump Eurosceptic, with politics not too far from that of Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, is likely to hamper Poland's relationship with the bloc and neighbouring Ukraine, dimming Tusk's hopes of Poland taking on a more central role in EU politics. This is, of course, bad news in and of itself for the EU, but it's particularly rough timing, because with George Simion out of the picture in Romania and Orban trailing in the polls in Hungary, there was some hope in Brussels that a Trzaskowski victory could pave the way for a period of relative unity, which now seems unlikely. Lots of people actively don't like shaving. It's getting increasingly expensive, with brands selling overpriced razor cartridges stuffed with useless technology. And even if you do pay for all of it, you're often still left with a bad shave, razor burn, ingrown hairs, and irritation. That's a problem that Henson aimed to solve with their razor. So, in typical TLDR style, let me explain why Henson's razors are better for 3 reasons. Firstly, Henson's AL13 razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, holds blades at a perfect 30-degree angle, extending the blade just 0.0013 inches past the shave plane. That's less than the thickness of a human hair, which keeps the blade supported properly, unlike many other companies' blades, and ensures a better protection for your skin. Secondly, they're just cheaper. Those fancy blade cartridges are full of single-use junk, which makes each individual blade way more expensive than what you actually need. Henson's razor just takes totally standard blades that cost just a few cents, which means you can save money and can refresh your blades more often, so you don't need to keep dragging a dull razor across your face to try and get value out of that overpriced plastic. Finally, speaking of plastic, those cartridges aren't good for the environment either, with 2 billion razor cartridges thrown away every year in the US alone. That's not true of Henson's blades, which contain 0 plastic, even in their packaging. If you want to try it out, go to hensonshaving.com/TLDR, or click the link in the description. Then add a razor and 100 blades to your cart. Once you've done that, add our discount code TLDR at checkout, and you'll get all of those blades totally free.